I used to think I had my whole life figured out. I followed the path everyone expected me to walk: study hard, get a good job, smile when people tell you you're doing great, even if you're quietly falling apart inside. For years I lived like that, trying to fit into a version of myself that never felt real. People saw confidence, but I saw confusion every time I looked in the mirror. It wasn't that I hated who I was. I just didn't know who that person truly was anymore. I had become an actor in my own life, performing a role that wasn't written for me. It started changing the day I helped my friend Emma prepare for a local theater show. She was short on time and needed someone to fill in for a rehearsal scene, just a temporary stand-in, she said, nothing serious. I remember laughing nervously when she handed me the outfit. "Come on," she smiled, "it's just for practice. Nobody's judging you." I almost said no. Something inside me twisted, not from fear of embarrassment, but something else I couldn't name. Yet I agreed. The room smelled faintly of hairspray and old curtains. The lights felt too bright. As I changed into the costume, every layer seemed to peel away a piece of who I'd been pretending to be. When I looked in the mirror, I froze. It wasn't about the clothes, it was about the expression staring back at me. For the first time, I didn't see confusion. I saw calm. I saw someone who looked free. Emma noticed it too. "You okay?" she asked softly, almost afraid to break the silence. I wanted to say I was fine, but my voice caught in my throat. "Yeah," I whispered, I don't recognize myself." She smiled in that understanding way only real friends can. "Maybe that's the point," she said. That night, I couldn't sleep. The moment replayed again and again in my mind: the softness of the fabric, the warmth of the lights, the way I felt when I stopped pretending. It scared me how right it felt. For days, I tried to bury it under excuses. It was just a costume. It didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew I was lying. Weeks passed, and I found myself revisiting that feeling in quiet moments. I started noticing how disconnected I'd been from myself for years, how much energy I spent trying to live up to what others expected. At first, I told no one. I'd close my room door, put on a simple scarf or a light piece of makeup, and just breathe. Not because I wanted to be someone else, but because, for once, I wanted to stop hiding. Of course, secrets don't stay secrets forever. One evening, my sister walked in without knocking. I froze, caught halfway between shame and panic. Her eyes widened, not in disgust, but in confusion. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said quietly. I couldn't find words. I expected laughter, anger, maybe disappointment. But she just stepped forward, took my hands, and said, "You look peaceful. I've never seen you like this." Something broke inside me, then the wall I'd built to keep myself safe. I cried, harder than I ever had before. Not from fear, but from relief. She hugged me and whispered, "You don't have to hide who you are from me." From that day, things began to shift. Slowly, quietly, I allowed myself to explore who I really was. I stopped worrying about labels, about what people might think. It wasn't easy. Some days, the mirror still scared me. Some friends drifted away, unsure of how to react. Others surprised me with kindness I never expected. The hardest part was facing my parents. They had always been traditional, loving in their own way but bound by expectation. I remember sitting across from them one evening, my hands trembling. "There's something I need to tell you," I began. My father looked up from his newspaper, my mother from her tea. I told them everything, not about costumes or makeup, but about the emptiness, the pretending, the years I'd spent trying to be someone I wasn't. The silence afterward was unbearable. Then my mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "We just want you to be happy," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "It might take us time to understand, but we love you." My father nodded slowly. He didn't say much, but the way he squeezed my shoulder said enough. That night, I sat outside under the cold sky and felt something shift inside me, a sense of peace I'd been chasing for years. It wasn't that everything was suddenly perfect. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with questions and challenges. But for the first time, I wasn't lost. I started documenting my journey, not online, not publicly, just for myself. Every day, I'd write how I felt, what I learned, what scared me. The entries turned into a conversation between who I was and who I was becoming. And slowly, the two began to meet in the middle. There was a day I'll never forget. I was walking down a crowded street, the world buzzing around me. The sun was warm, the air carried that scent of rain and dust, and for once, I wasn't thinking about how people saw me. I was just there, present, alive. And that's when I realized I wasn't becoming someone new. I was returning to who I'd always been, before fear and judgment buried me. Emma saw me again months later and smiled. "You've changed," she said. I laughed. "No," I replied, "I finally stopped pretending." Life didn't magically turn into a movie. There were still hard days, whispers, stares, moments of doubt. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered that mirror in the theater room, the first time I saw myself and didn't flinch. That was my rebirth. Today, when I look back, I don't feel shame for the years I spent lost. I feel gratitude. Because being lost taught me how to find myself. It showed me who my real friends were, who loved me without conditions, and how much strength it takes to be honest in a world that thrives on appearances. Sometimes, people ask me what changed. The truth is everything and nothing. I still laugh the same, cry the same, dream the same. But now, those feelings belong to me, not the version of me the world demanded. My reflection doesn't scare me anymore. It feels like home. If I could speak to the person I used to be, the one afraid to take that first step, to be seen, I'd tell them this: you're not broken for wanting to be real. You're not weak for needing to be yourself. The real tragedy isn't being different. It's never allowing yourself to find out who you truly are. There's a beauty in being found not by someone else, but by yourself. It's quiet, it's painful, and it's worth everything. So, from lost to found, that's my story. I didn't find perfection. I found truth. I found peace. I found me. And maybe, that's what it means to truly live. Months passed, and life began to settle into something quieter, softer but more real than anything I'd ever known. The world didn't change overnight, but my place in it did. I remember waking up each morning with a strange mix of fear and freedom, wondering who I'd become next, but also realizing that for once, I wasn't trying to escape anymore. I wasn't hiding behind layers of expectation. Every small step, from choosing what to wear, to how I spoke, to simply existing without apology, felt like learning to breathe again after years of holding my breath. Still, there were moments that tested me. I worked at a small marketing firm, surrounded by people who'd known the old version of me, the one who never spoke up, who followed every rule, who smiled just to blend in. One morning, I decided to walk in as the person I really was. Not disguised, not half-hearted, but whole. I wore clothes that felt right, simple, elegant, soft in tone but strong in meaning. When I looked in the mirror before leaving, I whispered to myself, "You deserve to be seen." As I entered the office, time seemed to slow. The air felt thick with silent stares and unspoken questions. A few people smiled. Some avoided eye contact. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out every sound. Then my manager, who'd always been distant but fair, approached me. I braced myself for a lecture or a joke. But she just said, "You look happy today. Let's make it a good one." That small sentence broke something open inside me, not pain this time, but gratitude. Later that week, one of my co-workers pulled me aside. "I didn't understand at first," she admitted. "But now I see how brave that is. You're teaching us something without even trying." Her words stayed with me, echoing long after she walked away. I realized that courage isn't about shouting your truth. Sometimes it's about quietly living it, day after day, even when the world still whispers behind your back. But not every day was gentle. There were cruel comments online when I eventually decided to share my journey publicly, not for attention, but because I wanted someone else, maybe lost like I once was, to know they weren't alone. Strangers told me I was confused, that I was betraying something sacred. At first, I tried to fight back. Then I realized I didn't owe them a war. My life wasn't an argument. It was a story. I kept recording small video journals, capturing pieces of my journey. Sometimes, I'd talk about fear. Other days, about joy. Over time, The comments began to shift. More people wrote, "I thought I was the only one who felt this way." Some thanked me for giving them the courage to face their own mirrors. I started receiving letters from teens, from parents, from people decades older than me saying, "You helped me understand my child," or, "You reminded me to forgive myself." That's when I understood the true meaning of transformation. It wasn't about appearance, or even identity alone, it was about connection. One evening, Emma came over with coffee, as she often did. We sat on the balcony watching the city lights blur in the distance. "You've come so far," she said, smiling softly. "Do you ever miss who you were?" I thought for a long time before answering. "I don't miss the person," I said. "But I miss how easy it was to pretend everything was fine. Back then, I didn't have to fight so hard to be seen." She nodded. "But now, at least you're fighting for something that's real." Her words hit me deeply. Because she was right. The old me lived in shadows. The new me lived in sunlight, sometimes blinding, sometimes harsh, but always real. And in that reality, even pain had meaning. A few weeks later, something happened that reminded me just how far I'd come. My father, who had always been quiet about my transformation, called me into the living room. He was watching an old home video, one from when I was maybe 8. I was dancing clumsily in front of the camera, spinning in a towel like a dress, laughing without fear. He paused the video and looked at me. "You've always been you," he said softly. "We just didn't see it then." I didn't know how to respond. I just sat beside him, tears forming before I could stop them. He didn't try to comfort me. He just let me cry. And that silence, that acceptance, meant more than any words could. After that, something in our relationship changed. He began asking questions not out of doubt, but curiosity. My mother started helping me pick clothes, telling me which colors suited my tone best. There were awkward moments, of course, but also laughter. Real laughter, the kind that fills a house and makes it feel like home again. I began speaking at small community events, sharing my story, not to preach but to connect. Every time I stood in front of strangers, my voice shook a little less. Once, after a talk, a woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. "My son's been struggling," she said. "I didn't understand him before tonight. Thank you for helping me see him." That's when it hit me, the power of one person's truth to heal another's heart. Slowly, the fear that had once defined me began to fade. I stopped seeing transformation as a destination and started seeing it as a journey, one that never really ends. Because becoming yourself isn't a single moment. It's 1,000 quiet choices made every day, even when no one's watching. I still have days when I question everything. Days when the old insecurities whisper again, when I wonder if I'm strong enough to keep walking this path. But then I remember that little kid in the home video, twirling, laughing, unafraid. That child wasn't lost. They were always there, waiting for me to come home. Now, when I step out into the world, I walk with that child inside me, free, curious, alive. I see strangers' eyes soften when they realize I'm not trying to be perfect, just real. Some smile back. Some don't. But I smile anyway. Because I know now being found isn't about being accepted by everyone. It's about accepting yourself enough to no longer need their permission. Every time I tell my story, I end it the same way. I say, the road from lost to found isn't easy. But when you get there, you'll understand the person you were searching for was never really gone. They were just waiting for you to be brave enough to look. That's what I learned. That's what I live by. And that's why, even on the hardest days, I wouldn't trade my journey for anything. Because it didn't just change how I look, it changed how I love, how I see others, and how I finally learned to see myself. And maybe that's all any of us are really trying to do, to stop running, turn around, and meet the person we were meant to be. To whisper, finally and fearlessly, "I'm home." There's a certain quiet that comes after years of chaos, a silence not of emptiness, but of peace. I started noticing it in the small things. The way morning sunlight slipped through the curtains. The sound of the kettle boiling while I got ready for work. The reflection in the mirror that no longer made me flinch or rush to look away. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rehearsing who to be. I was just living it. And that feeling, that gentle stillness, felt like freedom. But freedom, I learned, is never without cost. One evening, I attended a reunion with old friends from school. People who remembered the old me, quiet, withdrawn, trying too hard to fit in. I hadn't seen them in years, and part of me wondered if I was ready to face their version of my past. The moment I walked in, the chatter softened. Conversations paused. I could feel their eyes on me, curious, cautious, uncertain. Then one of them, Ryan, smiled. "Hey," he said, voice light, genuine. "Wow, you look happy." His tone carried no sarcasm, no judgment, just surprise, maybe admiration. I smiled back. "Yeah," I said softly. "I am." We talked for a while, about life, work, memories. Some avoided the topic entirely, others asked careful questions. There was one moment, though, that struck me deeply. Another friend, Sarah, pulled me aside near the end of the night. "You know," she said, "back in school, we always thought you were just shy. I never realized you were carrying so much inside. You seem whole now." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and whispered, "It took me a long time to get here." Driving home that night, I felt tears in my eyes, not from sadness, but from something like gratitude. I used to be terrified of people seeing the real me. Now I was thankful they finally could. Yet even in acceptance, loneliness has a way of finding you. There were nights I sat by the window, watching the city lights blur into the dark, wondering if anyone truly understood. Being found doesn't mean being finished, it means beginning again, learning how to exist in your own truth. Some days that truth felt heavy, like I was rebuilding my identity brick by brick while the world watched silently, unsure whether to help or judge. Then one unexpected moment reminded me why I kept going. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. Inside was a note that simply read, "I saw your video last month. My daughter has been struggling with who she is. Watching you helped her smile again for the first time in months. Thank you for being brave." There was no name, just those words. I sat on my couch and cried. That's when I realized that courage doesn't end with your own reflection. It ripples outward, touching lives you'll never meet. I decided then to start speaking openly, not as a symbol or inspiration, but as a human being. I began sharing my story at schools, small gatherings, anywhere that welcomed honesty. I didn't use big words or grand speeches. I just told the truth about fear, about discovery, about what it means to feel invisible and finally be seen. And every time, someone would approach me afterward and say quietly, "That's my story too." It made me realize how many of us live behind masks we don't even know we're wearing. A few months later, something shifted inside me again. I met someone, Daniel. It wasn't a fairy tale beginning. He didn't sweep me off my feet. He just listened. We met at a small art exhibit, both staring at a painting of a person split between shadow and light. "That's how I've felt my whole life," I said without thinking. He looked at me and replied, "Maybe that's what makes us beautiful, the contrast." We started talking more, meeting for coffee, walking in the park. He never asked me to explain who I was or why. He just accepted me, the way you accept sunlight or rain, as something natural. One night, as we sat watching the stars, he said, "You're not the first person I've met who's been lost. But you might be the first who found themselves without losing their softness." Those words stayed with me. Being loved for who you are is powerful. But being loved when you're still figuring it out, that's something else entirely. Daniel reminded me that transformation isn't just about self-acceptance. It's also about allowing others to see you, even when you're not finished healing. With him, I learned to laugh again, real laughter, the kind that fills a room and pushes out the ghosts of who you once were. We cooked together, made mistakes, argued about silly things. For once, I wasn't performing love, I was living it. But life, as always, has its way of testing peace. When I introduced him to my family, I could feel the tension in the room. My parents were kind, but unsure. My sister tried to keep the conversation light, but I could sense her unease. Later that night, my father pulled me aside. "You seem happy," he said, "and that's what matters. But you know the world won't always be kind." I nodded. "I know," I whispered. But I'd rather face the world as myself than survive as someone else. He smiled sadly and said, "Then you've already won." It took time, but even they grew to accept Daniel not because they understood everything, but because they saw how he treated me. Slowly, the walls began to fall, replaced by something gentler: acceptance through love. Now, when I think of my journey, I don't see it as a single story. It's a collection of moments of mirrors, of tears, of courage whispered in the dark. I see the people who stood by me, and even those who left, because both taught me something vital. Being found doesn't mean everyone will follow. Sometimes, you find yourself precisely because others let you go. There's one last memory that always brings me peace. A few months ago, I visited the old theater where everything began: the same dusty stage, the same cracked mirror, the same faint smell of old curtains. I stood there, in that same spot, and smiled. I could almost see the reflection of who I once was, trembling, uncertain. I whispered to that reflection, "We made it." Because we did. Through fear, through doubt, through every moment that tried to erase me, I made it here. And I'm still becoming, still learning, still unfolding. But I'm no longer lost. I'm no longer hiding. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. And maybe that's what finding yourself really means: not becoming someone new, but finally giving yourself permission to be who you've been all along. To look at your reflection and say, with quiet certainty, "Welcome home." It's strange how years can pass, and yet one memory can still feel like yesterday. Sometimes I walk past that same theater, the one where everything began, and I can almost hear the echo of who I used to be: a voice trembling with uncertainty, caught between who the world wanted and who I really was. But now, that echo doesn't haunt me. It comforts me. It reminds me how far I've come. Life didn't suddenly become perfect after I found myself. There were setbacks, there were days when I still questioned everything, when old insecurities tried to creep back in. But the difference now is that I no longer run from them. I face them, knowing that being found doesn't mean you never feel lost again. It means you finally know how to find your way back. A few years after my journey began, I started mentoring young people who felt trapped in the same confusion I once did. They would sit across from me, eyes full of fear, asking the same question I used to whisper to my reflection: "How do you know who you really are?" I always tell them the truth: you don't find it all at once. You find it in pieces, in moments of honesty, in mistakes, in the quiet nights when you finally stop pretending. One student, a shy boy named Aaron, once said to me, "I don't think I'm brave enough." I smiled and told him, "Neither was I." But bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the act of staying alive long enough to see the light again. Helping others became a kind of healing for me. Each story I heard reminded me that we're all carrying invisible battles. We all wear masks, some just heavier than others. And when you take yours off, you don't just free yourself, you give others permission to breathe too. Years went by. Daniel and I built a life together, quiet and steady. We moved into a small house with a garden in the back, nothing fancy, just peaceful. On weekends, we'd drink coffee under the morning sun, talking about everything and nothing. There were no more secrets, no more pretending. I remember one morning, he looked at me over his cup and said, "You know what's funny? You talk about being found, but I think you were never really lost. You were just waiting for the world to catch up to you." That made me laugh, but deep down, I knew he was right. Maybe found isn't a destination. Maybe it's a constant process, waking up every day and choosing to live in truth, no matter how hard it is. One autumn afternoon, I went back to visit my parents. My mother was in the kitchen, humming softly while preparing tea. My father sat in his usual chair, reading. When I walked in, he looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need words. "It's been a long road," he said quietly. "But I'm proud of you." I swallowed hard, holding back tears. For years, those were the words I never thought I'd hear. After dinner, I found an old photo album in the living room. I flipped through the pages: birthdays, school trips, small victories frozen in time. Then I came across a picture of me as a child, grinning wide, wearing a silly outfit that I'd put together myself. I laughed, but then something inside me stirred. That child, fearless, expressive, alive, was still here. They had been waiting patiently for me to return. That night, as I left my parents' house, I looked up at the stars. The air was cool, calm, endless. I whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular, maybe to the universe, maybe to that younger version of me who refused to give up. Now, when people ask me about my journey, I don't describe it as transformation anymore. I call it alignment, aligning who I am on the inside with how I choose to live on the outside. It's not about changing yourself into something new. It's about uncovering what was always there, buried under fear, expectation, and silence. Sometimes I share this story at small events or online, and people tell me it made them cry. But what I hope it really does is make them feel less alone. Because if my story teaches anything, it's that identity isn't something we find once and keep forever. It's something we nurture, protect, and grow into, again and again. I often end those talks by telling one last story about a mirror. The same cracked mirror from that theater years ago. I went back recently, just to see it again. It was still there, dusty but whole, reflecting light in imperfect fragments. I stared into it and thought about how, back then, I saw only confusion and fear. But now, in that same reflection, I saw something else: peace, warmth, and quiet strength. I placed my hand on the glass and smiled. "Thank you," I whispered again, not to the mirror this time, but to every version of myself that helped me get here, the scared one, the hopeful one, the one who dared to take the first step. When I walked out into the fading light, I realized something I'll never forget. Being found isn't about becoming someone different. It's about coming home to the person you've always been and finally staying there, with love, without apology. So yes, this is my story. From lost to found. From silence to truth. From fear to love. And if even one person hears it and feels a spark of hope, then every tear, every struggle, every moment of doubt, it was all worth it. Because maybe that's the real beauty of being human. We all lose ourselves sometimes. But if we're brave enough to listen, really listen, we'll always find our way back.